You. Flying this plane? You're just a kid. The man's mocking laughter echoed through the cabin. Everyone stared at the small girl in seat 7A, pitying her, dismissing her, never imagining she was their only chance at survival. Then two F-22 Raptors appeared outside, and their pilot said two words that changed everything: Raptor 93. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. Ellie Ward didn't look like someone who could save your life. At 17, she barely cleared 5 feet tall, with a round face dusted with freckles that made her look 12 at best. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore an oversized hoodie that swallowed her small frame. Sitting in seat 7A of Flight 703, clutching a worn backpack against her chest and staring out the window, she looked exactly like what everyone assumed she was, a nervous kid traveling alone. The backpack was old, faded blue with patches sewn over tears. The kind of bag a middle schooler might carry, stuffed with homework and snacks. Her sneakers were scuffed. Her jeans had a small hole in one knee. Everything about her screamed ordinary, forgettable, unimportant. To the 264 passengers and crew aboard Flight 703 that afternoon, she was invisible. Just another child in the endless stream of travelers. Probably visiting divorced parents. Probably scared of flying. Definitely not anyone worth a second glance. The Boeing 777 was scheduled for a routine afternoon flight from Atlanta to Boston, 3 hours of smooth flying over the eastern United States. Business travelers tapped on laptops. Families settled children with tablets and coloring books. Flight attendants went through practiced safety demonstrations that nobody watched anymore. Ellie watched every word of the safety briefing. She noted the emergency exit locations, counted rows to the nearest exit, observed the flight attendants' hand signals. Old habits. Training that never stopped, even on her day off. The man in seat 7B made those habits harder to maintain. Robert Chen was a large man, the kind who spread into neighboring seats without noticing or caring. Investment banker, expensive suit, leather briefcase that he'd shoved under the seat in front of him while complaining loudly about the lack of overhead space. He'd been on his phone since boarding, barking orders at someone about quarterly projections and market volatility. When Ellie had squeezed past him to reach the window seat, he'd barely glanced up, just pulled his knees in with obvious irritation. As soon as she was seated, he'd reclaimed both armrests and returned to his phone call. 20 minutes into the flight, Ellie needed to retrieve her notebook from her backpack. She'd stowed it under the seat, and reaching for it required her to lean forward slightly. Her elbow accidentally brushed Robert Chen's arm. "Sit still, kid," he barked, loud enough that passengers 3 rows back turned to look. His face was red with irritation, his voice carrying that particular tone of someone used to being obeyed. "This isn't a playground. Children who cause trouble shouldn't be flying alone. Where are your parents?" Ellie's cheeks flushed hot. She froze, her hand still reaching for the backpack, suddenly aware of every eye on her. The cabin felt smaller, the attention suffocating. "I'm sorry," she whispered, pulling her hand back and pressing herself against the window. "I didn't mean to." "Just sit still and be quiet," Robert snapped, already returning to his phone. God, why do airlines let unaccompanied minors in regular seats? She should be in the back where she can't bother anyone. Around them, passengers exchanged glances. A middle-aged woman in 7C looked at Ellie with pity, her expression a mixture of sympathy and discomfort. She mouthed, "Are you okay?" Ellie nodded quickly, trying to make herself smaller. Whispers rippled through nearby rows. "Poor thing, traveling alone like that. She looks terrified. I wonder if it's her first flight. Where's her mother? Who puts a child that young on a plane by herself? Probably a custody situation. Divorce kids, you know." A businessman in row 8 shook his head with judgment and returned to his magazine. A college student snapped a photo for social media, captioning it with something about the struggles of sitting near annoying kids on flights. A flight attendant walking past gave Ellie a kind smile but said nothing. She'd seen 1,000 nervous children flying alone. Nobody saw what was really happening. Nobody noticed that Ellie's hands, gripping the armrests, weren't shaking from fear. They were still, controlled, maintaining perfect calm. Nobody observed that her breathing was measured, deliberate, the kind of controlled respiration taught to fighter pilots to manage stress and maintain focus in high-pressure situations. Nobody looked closely enough to see that her eyes, fixed on the window, weren't glazed with anxiety. They were calculating. Analyzing. Processing information faster than any of them could imagine. She studied the slight vibration in the fuselage, comparing it to the sound frequency of the engines. She watched the angle of the wing outside her window, noting the subtle flex patterns that indicated air pressure and turbulence potential. She observed cloud formations at 30,000 feet, recognizing altocumulus patterns that suggested wind shear possibilities in the next 100 miles. She tracked the sun's position and automatically calculated their heading, speed, and estimated time of arrival. Her notebook, the one she tried to retrieve before being yelled at, wasn't filled with schoolwork or teenage doodles. Inside its worn pages were aerodynamic calculations written in her neat handwriting, emergency protocols memorized and refined, combat maneuver diagrams with annotations in military shorthand, weather pattern analyses, and aircraft system schematics that she could recall from memory. To anyone who might have glanced at those pages, they would look like gibberish. Mathematical formulas. Strange diagrams. Technical terminology that seemed far too advanced for a middle school student. Because Ellie Ward wasn't a middle school student. She was Raptor 93. Elite military pilot. Member of one of the most classified programs in United States defense operations. 800 flight hours logged before she could legally drive a car. Combat training that exceeded many active-duty Air Force pilots. A call sign earned through precision flying that had made experienced instructors stand in stunned silence. But officially, in every public record, in every database accessible to civilian systems, she didn't exist as anything more than a normal teenager. Her training was classified at levels that required presidential authorization to access. Her abilities were unknown to everyone except a small circle of military personnel who'd sworn oaths of secrecy. Her very existence as a military pilot was impossible to anyone outside that circle. That was exactly how her handlers wanted it. Ellie had been identified at age 12 during what she thought was routine standardized testing at her school. The tests weren't routine at all, they were screening tools used by military psychologists to identify exceptional candidates for classified programs. Her spatial reasoning scores were in the 99th percentile. Her pattern recognition abilities tested off the standard charts. Her reaction time fell into ranges typically only seen in Olympic athletes and fighter pilots. But the test scores alone weren't what caught the attention of the program directors. It was what happened during the follow-up interview. Military psychologist Dr. Sarah Chen had asked Ellie a series of increasingly complex hypothetical scenarios. Each one was designed to create stress, to push emotional boundaries, to find the breaking point where rational thinking collapsed into panic. Ellie never broke. When presented with an impossible scenario, a plane crash where she could only save half the passengers, she'd calmly work through the mathematics of survival, the ethics of choice, and the practical logistics of execution. She didn't cry. She didn't freeze. She approached the horrific hypothetical with the same methodical analysis she'd use for a math problem. Dr. Chen had never seen anything like it. Not in thousands of candidates, not in decorated combat veterans, not in experienced emergency responders. This 12-year-old girl possessed something that couldn't be taught, only discovered: unshakable calm under pressure. The kind of temperament that separates good pilots from great ones. The kind of mindset that means the difference between death and survival when systems fail at 40,000 feet. The program was small, experimental, and intensely controversial even within classified military circles. The Exceptional Youth Aviation Program, EYAP, in internal documents, though that name never appeared in any official records. The concept was radical: identify and train exceptional teenagers to pilot military aircraft in scenarios where youth and size could provide tactical advantages. Critics called it exploitation. Proponents called it evolution of warfare. The truth existed somewhere in between, a recognition that traditional recruitment timelines meant losing extraordinary talent, and that modern warfare sometimes required unconventional solutions. Ellie had spent 5 years in that program. 5 years that she could never discuss with friends, never mention to family beyond her parents who'd signed documents thicker than phone books. 5 years of training that started in simulators and gradually progressed to actual cockpits. She'd started with small aircraft, Cessnas and training jets, learning the basics of flight with instructors who were simultaneously amazed by her natural ability and terrified of the responsibility they carried. By age 14, she was flying F-16s in training scenarios. By 15, she'd graduated to F-22 Raptors, the most advanced fighter jets in the American arsenal. She'd also trained on commercial aircraft, Boeing 737s, 757s, 777s, in classified facilities where decommissioned planes were used to train pilots for every conceivable emergency. Engine failures. Hydraulic malfunctions. Complete electrical system breakdowns. Scenarios where every backup system failed and only raw skill stood between the aircraft and catastrophic disaster. Her instructors threw impossible situations at her, again and again, until the impossible became routine. Until her hands knew what to do before her conscious mind finished processing the emergency. Until flying became as natural as breathing, an extension of her will rather than a learned skill. They called her Raptor 93 after a training exercise where she'd executed a combat maneuver so precisely that it exceeded the performance parameters of pilots with 20 years of experience. The number wasn't random, it represented her percentile score in that particular evaluation. 93rd percentile among all pilots, including adults with decades of combat experience. She wore that call sign with quiet pride. In the classified world where she trained, it meant respect. It meant acknowledgement of skill. It meant that when things went catastrophically wrong, Raptor 93 was exactly who you wanted in the cockpit. But in the civilian world, the normal world where she still attended high school and did homework and pretended to be an ordinary teenager, nobody knew. Her classmates thought she was quiet and a bit odd. Her teachers thought she was bright but distracted. Her neighbors thought she was a normal kid who spent a lot of time traveling to visit relatives. Only her parents knew the truth, and they carried that knowledge like a stone. Pride mixed with terror every time she left for training. Love mixed with understanding that their daughter belonged to something larger than their family, something that might one day require the ultimate sacrifice. But today was supposed to be different. Today, Ellie was just a passenger. A normal flight home after visiting her aunt in Atlanta. Her credentials were locked away. Her call sign was silent. Her training was dormant. For once, for just a few hours, she could be a regular 17-year-old girl on a plane. She'd been looking forward to it, actually. The chance to just stare out the window without analyzing every detail. To read a book or listen to music without maintaining constant situational awareness. To be normal, just for a little while. Then Robert Chen had yelled at her, and passengers had stared with pity or judgment, and she'd remembered why being normal was sometimes harder than flying combat aircraft. In the cockpit, respect was earned through skill. In the civilian world, respect was often withheld based on appearance alone. She'd pressed herself against the window and tried to disappear, just wanting the flight to end so she could go home and forget about the embarrassment. Then the universe decided that Ellie Ward wouldn't get to be normal today after all. At 30,000 feet, without any warning, Flight 703 lurched violently to the left. The Boeing 777 tilted at nearly 40 degrees in less than 2 seconds, as if a giant invisible hand had slapped it sideways out of the sky. The movement was so sudden, so violent, that passengers didn't have time to scream, they could only gasp as gravity shifted and their bodies pressed hard against seatbelts. Coffee cups became projectiles. Laptops flew from tray tables. A woman's purse sailed across the cabin and slammed into the opposite wall. Overhead compartments burst open and bags tumbled out, one suitcase striking a passenger's shoulder hard enough to draw blood. Then came the screaming. The aircraft shuddered, metal groaning under impossible stress that it was never designed to handle. The sound was terrifying, a deep, resonant vibration that passengers could feel in their bones, the sound of an aircraft being pushed far beyond its tolerances. Red warning lights flooded the cabin, bathing everything in hellish crimson. Oxygen masks dropped from the ceiling panels, dangling like jellyfish tentacles, their sudden appearance triggering the primal fear that something had gone catastrophically wrong. The alarm system activated, a shrieking wail that seemed designed specifically to trigger panic. The sound was deafening, drowning out screams and prayers and the roar of engines that suddenly sounded wrong, strained, fighting forces they weren't designed to combat. Ellie's training kicked in before conscious thought formed. Her body reacted automatically, the way it had been trained to react through thousands of hours of simulation and real flight time. Her eyes went immediately to the window. The wing angle was wrong. Dangerously wrong. The aircraft was in a steep left bank, too steep for any normal maneuver. She could see the full underside of the wing, could see the flaps struggling to compensate, could observe stress patterns in the metal that indicated they were approaching structural failure limits. Outside, the horizon had disappeared. Instead of level flight, she saw ground where sky should be, sky where ground should be. The world had tilted sickeningly, and her inner ear was screaming that they were falling. But her training overrode that instinct. She wasn't falling, not yet. The aircraft was in an uncontrolled roll, possibly caused by hydraulic failure, autopilot malfunction, or both. The engines were still producing thrust, but thrust in the wrong direction when your aircraft is tilted at 40 degrees just accelerates your descent. She had perhaps 90 seconds before the roll became unrecoverable. Perhaps 2 minutes before structural failure. Maybe 3 minutes before they hit the ground. Her hands gripped the armrests, not from fear but from the calculated assessment that she might need to move very soon. She began running scenarios in her mind, emergency protocols, system failures, recovery procedures. Preparing herself for what might be required. In the cockpit, the situation was far worse than passengers could imagine. Captain David Morrison had been flying commercial aircraft for 23 years. He'd landed planes in thunderstorms that turned day into night. He'd dealt with bird strikes that destroyed engines. He'd handled drunk passengers, medical emergencies, equipment failures that sent his aircraft to maintenance for weeks. He thought he'd seen everything that could go wrong in aviation. He was wrong. The aircraft had hit severe clear air turbulence, a phenomenon where violent air movement occurs without any visible warning signs. No clouds, no weather radar indication, just suddenly flying into what felt like a brick wall made of wind. The Boeing 777's autopilot had tried to compensate, adjusting control surfaces to maintain level flight. But simultaneously, a hydraulic line in the right wing had failed, a microscopic stress fracture that had finally grown large enough to rupture under the force of the turbulence. The two failures happened at exactly the same moment, creating a cascading disaster. The autopilot tried to correct the hydraulic failure by overcorrecting with the opposite wing. That overcorrection, combined with the violent turbulence, created a roll rate that exceeded safe parameters. The aircraft tilted hard left. G-forces spiked instantly. Captain Morrison, turning to check a display at exactly the wrong moment, was slammed sideways. His head cracked against the side panel with a sickening sound that First Officer Thomas Chin heard even over the alarms. Captain Morrison slumped forward, unconscious, blood trickling from a cut above his left eye. Captain Morrison. Chin grabbed his shoulder, shaking him. No response. The experienced pilot who'd handled hundreds of emergencies was gone, leaving Chin alone in a cockpit full of screaming alarms and failing systems. Chen was 32 years old. He'd been a first officer for 9 years, had logged over 3,000 flight hours, and had dreamed of upgrading to captain next year. He was competent, professional, well-trained. He was also completely overwhelmed. The control yoke felt dead in his hands. He pulled back, nothing. He pushed forward, minimal response. The hydraulic pressure gauges were dropping, red lights indicating failures across multiple systems. The aircraft wasn't responding to his inputs the way it should, and every instinct screamed that they were about to spiral into an unrecoverable dive. His hands shook. His breath came in short gasps. His training said to stay calm, assess the situation, execute emergency protocols. But his training hadn't prepared him for this, for being suddenly alone, for having the lives of 264 people depending solely on him, for facing equipment failures that exceeded anything he practiced in simulation. He grabbed the radio, his voice breaking over the intercom. "This is the flight deck. We have an emergency. Main pilot is unconscious due to injury. I'm experiencing significant control difficulties. Flight attendants, prepare the cabin for emergency procedures. All passengers, remain seated with seatbelts fastened." His voice, carried throughout the cabin, turned fear into terror. In the cabin, chaos erupted like a bomb detonating. A woman in row 12 sobbed uncontrollably, her carefully applied makeup running in black streams down her face. Her husband held her, his own face pale as chalk, whispering reassurances he didn't believe. A businessman near the front vomited violently into a sick bag, his body unable to handle the combination of violent motion and sheer terror. The smell added to the nightmare. Children screamed for their parents. A 6-year-old boy in row 15 cried so hard he could barely breathe, his mother holding him tight while tears streamed down her own face. College students who'd been laughing and joking 30 seconds ago now clutched armrests with white knuckles, their young faces suddenly aged by the understanding of mortality. An elderly woman prayed loudly in Spanish, her rosary beads clicking between her fingers. Others joined her in different languages, different faiths, all united by the universal human response to impending death. Robert Chen, the man who'd yelled at Ellie, grabbed her arm hard, his expensive watch pressing into her skin. His face had transformed from angry to terrified, his eyes wide and wet. "We're going to die," he whispered, his voice choked. Oh God, we're all going to die." Ellie looked at him calmly. Really looked at him. Saw past the expensive suit and aggressive demeanor to the terrified human underneath. A man probably with a family. Maybe children of his own. Someone who'd yelled at her out of stress and impatience, not genuine cruelty. "Not today," she said quietly, more to herself than to him. He didn't hear her. The noise was too loud, alarms, screams, prayers, the roar of engines straining against forces they weren't designed to handle, the terrible groaning of metal being stressed beyond its design limits. But Ellie heard something else. Something that made her blood run cold and her training surge to the forefront of her consciousness. Through the thin fuselage walls, above the chaos inside the cabin, came a sound most passengers wouldn't recognize. The distinctive roar of military jet engines, not the steady drone of commercial turbofans, but the aggressive, powerful scream of fighters designed for combat. She pressed her face to the window, looking past the tilted wing, scanning the sky. There. Two dark shapes, angular and predatory, closing in from different angles. F-22 Raptors, the most advanced air superiority fighters in the world, flanking Flight 703 at a distance of less than 500 yards. In aviation terms, that was knife-fighting distance. These weren't friendly escorts on a routine patrol. This was an intercept. An aggressive military response to a civilian aircraft exhibiting dangerous behavior. Ellie's mind raced through the implications. Flight 703 had deviated from its flight path due to the emergency. It was flying erratically, experiencing control problems, not responding properly to air traffic control. In a post-9/11 world, that combination triggered every alarm in military defense systems. Somewhere, in NORAD command centers and Air Force bases, Flight 703 had lit up radar screens like a Christmas tree. Erratic flight path. Possible loss of control. Potential hijacking scenario. All the warning signs that meant a civilian aircraft might have been turned into a weapon. The F-22s weren't there to help. They were there to ensure that if Flight 703 was under hostile control, it wouldn't reach any populated areas. In the lead F-22, Major Daniel Park, call sign Viper 1, watched the Boeing 777 through his heads-up display. 15 years as a fighter pilot, 3 combat deployments, countless intercept missions. He'd escorted aircraft before, had forced planes to land, had even fired warning shots past hijacked cargo planes. But he'd never had to shoot down a civilian airliner full of innocent people. The weight of that potential order sat on his shoulders like a physical presence. Flight 703, this is United States Air Force, call sign Viper 1, he transmitted on emergency frequency. Identify your pilot's status immediately. You have deviated from flight path and are exhibiting erratic flight behavior. Confirm you are not under hostile control. You have 30 seconds to respond or we will implement forced landing procedures. In the cockpit, First Officer Chen heard the transmission. Forced landing procedures, that was military code for, we will make you land, violently if necessary. It meant the fighters might fire on their engines, disable their aircraft, force them down wherever they could reach. He wanted to respond. Desperately wanted to explain they were experiencing an emergency, that there was no hijacking, just equipment failure and horrible luck. But he couldn't. His hands were locked on the control yoke, fighting the aircraft with every ounce of strength, trying to prevent the roll from becoming a spiral. If he let go to reach for the radio, they might lose what little control remained. Flight 703, respond immediately. This is your final warning. Viper 1's wingman, Lieutenant Sarah Rodriguez, Viper 2, armed her weapons systems. Not missiles, but her cannon. If they had to disable this aircraft, precision fire into the engines was the only option that might let it glide down instead of simply exploding. She didn't want to do it. The thought of killing innocent people made her physically ill. But orders were orders, and if Flight 703 was headed toward a city. Viper 1, we're 15 seconds from weapons authorization window, she said quietly. Copy, Viper 2. Stay ready. Flight 703, you have 15 seconds. Identify your pilot or we will engage. In the cabin, Ellie made a decision. She stood up. Around her, passengers were lost in their own terror. Nobody noticed at first that the small girl from 7A was on her feet, moving toward the aisle with purpose. But as she stepped past Robert Chen, he grabbed her arm reflexively. No. Sit down. You'll get hurt. She looked at him. Sir, I need you to let go of my arm. Something in her voice, the calm authority, the absolute certainty, made him release her immediately. She moved into the aisle. The violent turbulence should have made walking impossible. Passengers were being thrown against their seatbelts. Flight attendants who tried to move were holding desperately to seat backs, unable to take more than one step at a time. But Ellie walked through it. She placed one hand on the seat backs, using them for balance but not support. Her movements were economical, efficient, her body automatically adjusting for the aircraft's violent motion. She'd trained in environments designed to disorient, had practiced moving in simulators that spun and tilted, had learned to trust her vestibular system even when her eyes said the world was wrong. She looked like a child walking through an earthquake. Steady. Purposeful. Impossible. Passengers began to notice. Heads turned. Conversation stopped mid-prayer. The woman who'd been crying saw this small girl moving forward with more stability than adults twice her size. What is she doing? Someone whispered. Is that the kid who was in 7A? Someone stop her. Flight attendant Sarah Martinez saw Ellie moving forward. 10 years with the airline, thousands of flights, extensive emergency training. She'd handled medical emergencies, violent passengers, equipment failures. But she'd never experienced anything like this, an aircraft coming apart around them, a captain unconscious, and now a child walking toward the cockpit during the crisis. Sarah fought her way up the aisle, grabbing seat backs for support. "Sweetheart," she called out. "You need to return to your seat. It's not safe." Ellie kept moving. Sarah lunged forward and caught her shoulder, holding firm. "Please, honey, I know you're scared, but you have to sit down." Ellie turned to face her. Sarah later told investigators what she saw in that moment, eyes that didn't match the child's face at all. Not fear. Not panic. Something else entirely. Focus. Clarity. Weight that seemed impossible for someone so young. "Ma'am," Ellie said calmly, "I need to get to the cockpit. Right now." "Absolutely not. No unauthorized personnel can." "If we don't correct the roll angle in the next 90 seconds, Ellie interrupted, her voice still calm but carrying absolute certainty, "the wing structure will exceed maximum stress tolerance. The aircraft will start to break apart. I can help." Sarah stared at her. Those weren't the words of a scared child. Those were technical terms, specific and accurate. But it was impossible. She was just a kid. "Honey, I appreciate that you're trying to help, but you need to." "I'm a pilot," Ellie said simply. Sarah blinked. "What?" "I'm a military pilot. Classified program. I have over 800 flight hours and I'm rated on Boeing 777 aircraft. I can help your first officer. But we're running out of time." The aircraft lurched again, tilting further. A sickening crack echoed through the cabin, something structural giving way under stress. Screams intensified. Over the intercom, First Officer Chen's voice cracked with barely controlled panic, "We're losing it. I can't hold her. Anyone with flight experience, please report to the cockpit immediately." From outside the aircraft, transmitted on frequencies that passengers couldn't hear, the F-22s made their final call, "Flight 703, you have 15 seconds to respond. Confirm pilot status now or we will initiate forced landing procedures." Sarah made a decision that would save 264 lives. Maybe it was desperation. Maybe it was the absolute certainty in this child's eyes. Maybe it was the first officer's plea for anyone with flight experience. Maybe it was just instinct, the same instinct that had kept her calm during countless emergencies. "Go," she said, stepping aside. "Move." Ellie moved. Robert Chen, still gripping his armrest in 7B, watched through tear-blurred eyes as the girl he'd yelled at walked purposefully toward the cockpit. The girl he'd called a troublemaker. The girl he'd dismissed as an annoying child. She was going to save them. Somehow, impossibly, she was going to save them. Other passengers watched too. The businessman in row 8. The college students. The praying grandmother. All eyes followed the small figure moving through chaos with impossible calm. Ellie reached the cockpit door. In normal circumstances, it would be locked, impenetrable, secured against any threat. Post 9/11 protocols meant that door was built to withstand axes, firearms, explosives. Nothing was supposed to get through. But these weren't normal circumstances. And Ellie didn't need to break through. She knocked. Not a regular knock. A specific rhythm. 3 short raps. 2 long. 3 short again. Precise timing between each set, exact pressure on each knock. Military aviation code. A signal known only to classified personnel. A pattern that identified you as friendly, as trained, as one of a very small circle of people with specific clearances. Inside the cockpit, First Officer Chen heard it through his panic. That rhythm cut through the chaos like a bell, clear and unmistakable. He knew that code. He'd been briefed on it years ago during classified military coordination training, protocols for how civilian pilots should interact with military aircraft in certain scenarios. But it was impossible. There were no air marshals listed on this flight. No military personnel on the manifest. They were alone up here. His hands still fighting the controls, he glanced at the door camera screen mounted on the panel. Saw a child. A small girl with a backpack. His mind couldn't process it. But his training overrode confusion. That code was never used casually. Never used as a joke. If someone knocked that pattern, it meant something critical. Something real. He reached over with one hand and hit the door release. The lock disengaged with a click. Ellie pushed through into the cockpit. The scene was worse than she'd imagined. Captain Morrison slumped forward in his seat, blood on his face, completely unconscious. First Officer Chen white-knuckled on the controls, eyes wide with terror and exhaustion, sweat pouring down his face despite the cool cabin air. Warning lights everywhere. Alarms screaming. The artificial horizon display showing impossible angles. Hydraulic pressure gauges in the red. Backup systems failing. The aircraft was dying around them, and the first officer was barely holding it together. Chen looked at Ellie with wild eyes. No. What are you? This isn't safe. You need to get out. Ellie closed the door behind her and moved forward with the same calm purpose she'd shown in the cabin. Sir, my name is Ellie Ward. Call sign Raptor 93. I'm here to help you fly this aircraft. Chen froze. His hands remained on the controls, but his mind went completely blank for 2 seconds. Raptor 93. He'd heard that call sign. Heard it in classified briefings about the youth pilot program. Heard it mentioned with respect and disbelief by military pilots who'd witnessed the training exercises. It was supposed to be legend. A story people told. The teenage pilot who'd outflown seasoned veterans. The kid who'd executed maneuvers that shouldn't have been possible. But it couldn't be real. It couldn't be this small girl standing in front of him. You're really. Over the radio, the F-22 pilot's voice cut through with sharp authority. Flight 703, this is Viper 1. You have 5 seconds to identify your pilot or we will be authorized to engage. 5. 4. 3. Ellie reached for the radio transmit button. Pressed it with steady fingers. Spoke clearly, her young voice carrying absolute certainty. Viper 1, this is Raptor 93. Authorization code Sierra November 77 Charlie. I am assuming control of Flight 703. Complete silence on the military frequency. In his F-22 cockpit, Major Park felt the world stop. His finger froze on the cannon trigger. His mind refused to process what he'd just heard. Raptor 93. That call sign existed. It was real, not legend. He'd seen classified video of the training exercises, had watched in disbelief as a teenager executed combat maneuvers that exceeded his own abilities. But she was supposed to be in training status. Not operational. Not on civilian flights. Not saving a commercial aircraft at 30,000 feet. Say again. His voice cracked slightly. Did you say Raptor 93? Affirmative, Viper 1. Ellie Ward, call sign Raptor 93, authorization code Sierra November 77 Charlie. I am in Flight 703's cockpit. Captain is unconscious from G-force impact during initial roll. First officer is at his operational limits. Aircraft is experiencing hydraulic failure in the right wing system combined with autopilot malfunction. I am assuming control now. Viper 2, Lieutenant Rodriguez, broke in. Viper 1, confirm we just heard Raptor 93's voice on this frequency. Confirmed, Viper 2. Stand by. Major Park's training battled his disbelief. The call sign was real. The authorization code was correct. He'd been briefed on those codes before, knew they were changed monthly and impossible to fake. But this was a child. A kid who should be in school, not flying commercial aircraft through catastrophic emergencies. Then his training won. Because in the military, call signs carried weight. They represented skill, dedication, proven ability. And Raptor 93's call sign had been earned through performance that exceeded standards. Age didn't matter. Appearance didn't matter. Capability mattered. Raptor 93, he said, and he used the formal address for a fellow pilot. What is your current status and what are your orders, ma'am? In the cockpit, First Officer Chen heard the F-22 pilot call this teenager, ma'am, and felt reality shift. The elite fighter pilot, someone Chen would never dare address casually, was speaking to this child with military deference and respect. I need to assess the aircraft systems, Ellie said to Chen, already scanning the instruments. May I take the captain's seat? Yes. Yes, God, please. Chen's voice shook. I don't know if I can hold this much longer. Ellie moved to the captain's chair. It was too big for her, designed for an adult male pilot. Her feet barely reached the rudder pedals. But she adjusted quickly, pulling the seat forward as far as it would go and using the seat cushion to prop herself higher. Her hands settled on the controls with practiced certainty. Viper 1, she transmitted, maintain current escort position. I'm stabilizing the aircraft now. Stand by for emergency descent coordination. Request priority landing clearance at nearest suitable airport with adequate runway length for emergency landing. Roger, Raptor 93. You're cleared for emergency priority. Nearest suitable airport is Bradley International, bearing 045, distance 42 miles. We're coordinating with Tower now. They're clearing all traffic. You'll have complete approach clearance. Copy, Viper 1. Beginning stabilization now. Ellie's hands moved across the instruments. Not frantically, not hesitantly. With precision that looked like choreography, like she'd practiced these exact movements 1,000 times. Because she had. She assessed the hydraulic failure first. Right wing system was completely gone, catastrophic line rupture, no chance of recovery. The left wing system was operating at 40% capacity, struggling under the load of trying to control the entire aircraft. The autopilot had tried to compensate by overcorrecting with the left wing, creating the violent roll that had knocked Captain Morrison unconscious. Now the autopilot was fighting against manual control inputs, making everything worse. I'm disengaging the autopilot, she said calmly. It's fighting us. We need full manual control. Are you sure? Chen's voice wavered. If we lose autopilot. It's already lost. It's causing more problems than it's solving. Her hand moved to the autopilot disconnect. Autopilot off. Now. She pressed the button. The autopilot disengaged with a warning chime that added to the cacophony of alarms. The aircraft immediately felt different in her hands, more responsive, but also more demanding. Every input now mattered. Every mistake would be instant. Chen watched as she adjusted the trim, redistributed power to the remaining hydraulic system, and corrected the roll angle with micro-movements that he'd only seen from pilots with decades of experience. She wasn't fighting the aircraft. She was working with it, finding what still functioned and using it to compensate for what didn't. We're in a left roll caused by complete hydraulic failure on the right wing, she explained, her voice calm and instructional. The autopilot tried to compensate but overcorrected. That created the violent maneuver that injured Captain Morrison. Now we're dealing with asymmetric control, left wing doing all the work, right wing almost dead weight. How do you know all this? Because I've flown this exact scenario 37 times in simulation, Ellie replied, adjusting the throttle with precise movements. Usually, it ends badly. In simulation, we crashed 23 times before I figured out how to save it. And the other 14 times? I landed it. Not perfectly, but everyone survived. She glanced at him. We're going for number 15 right now. The aircraft began to respond. The violent shaking eased incrementally. The roll angle decreased, slowly, carefully, like coaxing a frightened animal. Ellie wasn't forcing the aircraft to obey. She was guiding it, suggesting corrections, working within the limits of what the damaged systems could handle. Outside, Major Park watched through his advanced targeting systems. Viper 2, are you seeing this? Copy, Viper 1. She's actually correcting it. The roll is decreasing. Pitch is stabilizing. That Boeing shouldn't be flyable in this condition, but she's flying it. Who the hell is this kid? Park whispered, though he already knew. Raptor 93. The legend made real. In the cabin, the change was subtle at first. The violent shaking became steady turbulence. The aircraft's tilt lessened by degrees. The alarm tones changed pitch, still urgent, but the edge of desperation faded. The aircraft was still in serious trouble, but it felt less like falling and more like flying again. Passengers looked around with desperate hope. A man in row 16 unclenched his hands from the armrests, his knuckles slowly regaining color. A mother stopped crying long enough to wipe her daughter's tears. The praying grandmother clutched her rosary tighter, but her words changed from please to thanks. Sarah Martinez stood at the cockpit door, watching through the gap. That small girl, that child they'd all dismissed, that teenager who'd been yelled at and pitted, was flying a Boeing 777 with dying hydraulics like she'd been born in a cockpit. Sir, Ellie said into the radio, addressing the F-22 pilots with calm professionalism, I'm going to need those landing coordinates confirmed. Current fuel status gives us approximately 22 minutes of flight time before reserves drop to critical levels. Raptor 93, Bradley International confirms ready for emergency landing. Runway 33 cleared. Emergency vehicles staging. Approach control is standing by on frequency 121.7. Copy. Switching to approach control. She looked at Chen. Can you handle communications with approach while I focus on flying? Yes. Yes, I can do that. Chen felt purpose return. He'd been overwhelmed, but now he had a role. A partner. I'll coordinate everything. Thank you. You're doing great. She said it simply, matter-of-factly, but Chen felt something shift in his chest. This teenager was encouraging him. Supporting him. Leading him. He switched frequencies and began coordinating with approach control, his voice steadying as he fell into practice procedures. Having someone else share the burden made everything manageable again. Ellie continued stabilizing the aircraft. She checked every instrument, made tiny adjustments, her hands moving with the kind of muscle memory that usually took 20 years to develop. She'd compressed that experience into 5 years of intensive training, but it showed in every movement. The passengers didn't know what was happening. They couldn't see into the cockpit. They didn't know that a 17-year-old girl who looked like a middle schooler was flying their aircraft. They just knew that the violent shaking had stopped, that the aircraft felt more controlled, that maybe, impossibly, they might survive. Robert Chen sat in 7B, his expensive suit rumpled, his face streaked with tears. He watched the cockpit door, watched flight attendants moving with renewed purpose, and realized that the girl he'd yelled at was up there. Saving them. Saving him. The shame hit him like a physical weight. Current altitude 26,000 feet, Chen reported. Descent rate 500 feet per minute. We're still descending, but it's controlled now. Good, Ellie said. I'm going to level us at 20,000 feet, then begin approach descent. We need to burn some speed first. Right now, we're too fast for safe landing configuration. She worked the throttles, reducing power incrementally. Too fast and they'd rip the aircraft apart with deceleration forces. Too slow and they'd fall from the sky. She found the balance point through feel as much as instrumentation. Raptor 93, Major Park transmitted, "Your flying is exceptional. I've been doing this for 15 years and I've never seen anyone handle a crippled aircraft this well. It's an honor to escort you." "Thank you, sir," Ellie replied, and there was genuine warmth in her voice. "Your support means everything right now." In military command centers, word was spreading. NORAD commanders were getting real-time updates. Pentagon officials were being briefed. The classified youth pilot program was about to become very public, and everyone involved knew it would spark controversy, investigations, and questions. But right now, none of that mattered. Right now, Raptor 93 was proving that the program worked. That the controversial decision to train exceptional teenagers was vindicated by results. That excellence transcended age. General Raymond Marks, director of the EYAP program, stood in his office watching live satellite feed of Flight 703. His entire career had been built on the belief that traditional thinking limited military effectiveness. That innovation required risks. That extraordinary people came in unexpected forms. He'd fought for 5 years to keep the program funded, defended it against critics who called it child exploitation, argued with politicians who saw only the risk and never the potential. Now, Raptor 93 was showing them all. "She's going to save them," his deputy said quietly beside him. "I know," Marks replied. "She always does." At 18,000 feet, Ellie began the approach descent. "Bradley approach, this is Flight 703. We're established on approach, requesting final clearance for runway 33. Flight 703, you are cleared for emergency landing runway 33. Winds 270 at 8 knots. Emergency equipment is standing by. You're cleared for any approach speed you require. Copy, approach. Beginning final descent now." The aircraft responded to her inputs. Chen monitored systems, calling out readings like they'd flown together for years. The partnership worked because Ellie made it work. She didn't bark orders, she requested assistance. She didn't claim superiority, she acknowledged his experience. At 10,000 feet, a new problem emerged. "Hydraulic pressure is dropping again," Chen reported, his voice tight with renewed fear. "We're losing the left wing system now too." Ellie scanned the gauges. He was right. The left wing hydraulics, the only system keeping them airborne, was failing. Probably from strain, from being pushed beyond design limits for too long. They had maybe 10 minutes before total hydraulic failure. Maybe less. "How far to the runway?" she asked calmly. 18 miles. At current speed, about 7 minutes. "We'll make it." She said it with such certainty that Chen believed her. "But if we lose hydraulics completely? We have manual reversion. And we have gravity." She adjusted their descent angle slightly. "Trust me. We'll make it." At 5,000 feet, Chen activated the landing gear. They both held their breath. The hydraulic pressure was too low. The gear wouldn't deploy through normal means. "Manual release," Ellie said, her voice still calm despite the new emergency. She reached for the emergency gear extension lever, a mechanical backup that used gravity and springs instead of hydraulics. Gear extension override. Now. She pulled the large red lever. They felt a series of thumps as mechanical locks released and gravity pulled the landing gear down. Springs forced it into position. Mechanical linkages locked it in place. 3 green lights appeared on the instrument panel. "Gear down and locked," Chen announced, his voice shaking with relief. All 3 confirmed. "Viper 1, we're on final approach," Ellie transmitted. "Gear down and locked. Hydraulics failing but we're in range. Thank you for the escort, sir. It's been an honor." "Honor's entirely ours," Raptor 93, Major Park replied, and his voice carried emotion that military discipline usually suppressed. You're the finest pilot I've ever had the privilege to fly with. Bring her home safe, ma'am. Will do, sir. Raptor 93 out. At 3,000 feet, Ellie lined up with the runway. She could see it now, a long strip of concrete that looked impossibly small from this altitude but represented salvation. Emergency vehicles lined both sides, fire trucks and ambulances ready for disaster. The aircraft was heavy, sluggish, fighting her every input as hydraulic pressure continued dropping. But she'd trained for this. Trained for scenarios where every backup failed, where only raw skill and understanding of aerodynamics stood between survival and catastrophe. At 1,000 feet, she made final corrections. Compensating for crosswind. Adjusting for the aircraft's uneven weight distribution. Calculating the exact moment to flare, pull the nose up to reduce descent rate for landing. 200 feet, Chen called out. 150. 100. Ellie pulled back gently on the yoke. The nose came up. The descent rate decreased. The main landing gear was seconds from touching concrete. 50 feet. 40. 30. The aircraft hung in the air for a moment that felt eternal. Ellie made one final micro-adjustment, correcting for a gust of wind that threatened to push them off center line. The main gear kissed the runway. Not slammed. Not crashed. Kissed. A landing so smooth that passengers barely felt the touchdown. We're down. Chen shouted. We're down. Ellie deployed the thrust reversers immediately. They were partially functional, only about 40% of normal power, but enough to help. She used maximum manual braking, feeling the aircraft slow through sheer force of friction and the remnants of the thrust reversers. The runway markers passed. 5,000 feet remaining. 4,000. 3,000. Emergency vehicles raced alongside, ready to intervene if something went wrong. 2,000 feet. 1,000. 500. And then they stopped. Complete stop. On the runway. Safe. All 264 people aboard alive and unhurt. For 3 seconds, the cabin was absolutely silent. Passengers couldn't process it. They'd been certain they would die. Had accepted it. Made peace with it. Said final prayers and whispered last I love yous to family members on phones. And now they were stopped. Safe. On the ground. Alive. Then the silence shattered. The cabin erupted in a sound that wasn't applause, it was something deeper, more primal. The sound of 264 people who'd stared death in the face and survived. Parents grabbed their children and wept. Strangers hugged each other. Strong men broke down crying. People laughed and sobbed simultaneously, emotions too powerful to control. In the cockpit, Ellie sat back in the captain's chair, her small hands still on the controls. She let out a long, shaky breath. We did it, she said quietly. Chen was crying. Open, unashamed tears streaming down his face. You did it. My God, you actually did it. You saved us all. We're a team, Ellie insisted, turning to look at him. You held this aircraft together until I could help. You coordinated everything. You trusted me when you had every reason not to. That mattered. You mattered. Chen reached over and squeezed her shoulder. Thank you. Thank you for saving my life. For saving everyone. Emergency crews surrounded the aircraft immediately. Paramedics rushed aboard to help Captain Morrison, who was regaining consciousness with a massive headache and no memory of the last 20 minutes. He looked around in confusion, saw First Officer Chen's tear-streaked face, saw the small girl in his seat. What happened? You're going to need to sit down for this story, Captain, Chen said, laughing through his tears. Sarah Martinez opened the cockpit door fully. Passengers crowded forward, desperate to see who had saved them. They'd heard the first officer talking to someone. Heard a young voice on the intercom earlier. But they couldn't believe what they saw. A child. A small girl who barely filled the captain's chair. Teenage girl who looked like she should be worried about homework and prom, not flying commercial aircraft through catastrophic emergencies. But they saw her differently now. They saw the calm in her eyes. The confidence in her posture. The way she'd moved through chaos while they'd been paralyzed with fear. The elderly veteran, Staff Sergeant William Hayes, stood up in row 5. He wore his faded Air Force jacket like a badge of honor, the fabric worn but carefully maintained. His cap bore pins from 3 tours in Vietnam, commendations for service that had defined his youth. He stood at attention in the aisle, his back straight despite 78 years of age. He raised his hand in a perfect military salute, crisp, formal, carrying the weight of 50 years honoring the uniform and what it represented. "Ma'am," his voice carried through the cabin, strong despite his age, "that was the finest piece of flying I have witnessed in 50 years of military and civilian aviation. You are a credit to your service, to your program, and to every pilot who's ever earned their wings. It has been an honor to have my life saved by someone of your caliber." Ellie stood from the captain's chair. She still barely reached the headrests. But she returned the salute with practiced precision, hand at the correct angle, eyes meeting his, posture perfect. "Thank you, sir. I'm honored by your words. I was just doing what my instructors trained me to do. They deserve the credit." "No, ma'am," Hayes said firmly. "Training gives you skills. But courage? That comes from inside. And you showed more courage in 20 minutes than most people show in a lifetime." Other passengers stood. Not to applaud, but to show respect. The businessman from row 8 who'd shaken his head in judgment. The college students who'd been laughing. The mother who'd pitied her. The praying grandmother who crossed herself and mouthed a blessing. They saw her now. Really saw her. Robert Chin pushed through the crowd, his expensive suit rumpled and stained with sweat. His face was blotchy from crying, his carefully styled hair disheveled. He'd spent the entire flight after takeoff trying to project power and importance. Now he looked small. Humbled. Broken by the weight of his own actions. "I yelled at you," he said, his voice cracking. He couldn't meet her eyes. "I called you a troublemaker. I said children shouldn't fly alone. I treated you like you were nothing. Like you were just an annoyance to be dealt with." He finally looked up, tears streaming freely down his face. "And you saved us all. You saved my life. You could have let me die, I would have deserved it after how I treated you, but you saved me anyway." Ellie looked at him with kindness, not anger. She saw past the expensive clothes and aggressive demeanor to the human underneath. A man who'd made a mistake. Who'd judged based on appearance. Who was now confronting his own prejudice in the most dramatic way possible. "Sir, it's okay. You didn't know. Most people don't. But I should have been kind anyway," he said, the words pouring out between sobs. "I should have been kind without needing a reason. I should have treated you with respect just because you're a human being, not because you might save my life someday. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." "I forgive you," Ellie said simply. "Everyone makes mistakes. Everyone judges sometimes. What matters is what you do after. How you grow. Who you become." Robert pulled out his wallet with shaking hands, extracted a business card. "This is my card. If you ever need anything at all, please call me. I want to make this right. I want to be better than the person who yelled at you today." Ellie took the card. "Thank you. That means a lot." A young woman approached tentatively. She was 23, graduate student, had been working on her thesis when the emergency hit. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "How did you stay so calm?" "I was terrified." Everyone was terrified. But you just walked through it like it was normal. Ellie thought about her answer. Fear is normal. Being terrified is human. But my instructors taught me that fear doesn't have to control you. You can be afraid and still act. You can be terrified and still think clearly. Fear isn't weakness, it's just information your body is giving you. What you do with that information is what defines you. I want to be like that, the woman said quietly. I want to be brave like you. You already are, Ellie replied. You survived this. You're here. That took courage too. Different courage than flying, but courage nonetheless. Media crews arrived within minutes. News helicopters circled the airport. Cameras from every major network pointed at Flight 703. Reporters shouted questions from behind police barricades. The story was already exploding across social media. 17-year-old saves 264 lives, secret military pilot program revealed, girl dismissed as child becomes hero. But military personnel in dark suits appeared faster than media could penetrate airport security. Men and women in unmarked vehicles, carrying classified credentials, creating a perimeter around the aircraft. Ellie's program was supposed to be secret. Her existence as a military pilot was classified information. They couldn't hide what had happened. Too many witnesses. Too much media coverage. Too public, too dramatic, too impossible to contain. But they could control how much information leaked. A woman in her 40s approached Ellie with military bearing and a gentle expression. Major Lisa Chen, Program Liaison. Raptor 93, we need to debrief you and then get you out of here before media gets too close. I understand, ma'am. You did good work today, Ellie. Exceptional work. You just made a lot of people very proud and a lot of other people very nervous. She smiled slightly. The program's about to become very public. Hope you're ready for that. I just wanted to help, ma'am. I know. But helping has consequences. Good consequences, but still consequences. Come on. Let's get you processed and home. The story exploded globally. Teenage girl saves 264 lives in dramatic emergency landing. Secret military pilot program finally revealed. Hero in seat 7A, the girl they dismissed becomes their savior. Raptor 93, the call sign that saved Flight 703. News channels played the audio of her calm voice coordinating with F-22 pilots. They interviewed passengers who described watching a child walk through chaos to save them all. They found First Officer Chen, who told reporters, she's better than pilots with 20 years of experience. Age is just a number. Skill is what matters. Congressional hearings were scheduled. Investigations launched. Questions raised about the ethics of training teenage pilots, the legality of classified youth programs, the implications of putting minors in combat-adjacent situations. But buried in all the controversy was the undeniable fact, Raptor 93 had saved 264 lives. When every adult had been overwhelmed, when systems had failed, when death seemed certain, a 17-year-old girl had stepped forward and done the impossible. General Raymond Marks gave one interview. Just one. He sat in front of cameras and spoke with quiet intensity. The EYAP program exists because exceptional young people exist. We don't create them, we discover them and give them tools. Ellie Ward possessed extraordinary abilities before we ever met her. We just taught her how to use them. And today, she proved that excellence doesn't require age or size or years. It only requires courage, skill, and dedication. Anyone who questions this program needs to ask the 264 people aboard Flight 703 whether they care how old their hero was. 6 months passed. The FAA investigation concluded that without Ellie's intervention, Flight 703 would have entered an unrecoverable spiral within 90 seconds of the first officer's distress call. Total hydraulic failure would have occurred within 3 minutes. The aircraft would have impacted the ground at high speed, killing everyone aboard instantly. Her actions were deemed extraordinary, her skill level unprecedented for any pilot her age, and her decision-making consistent with the highest standards of aviation professionalism. Captain Morrison returned to flying after medical clearance, carrying a new perspective on unexpected heroes. He requested to meet Ellie, thanked her for saving his life, and asked if she'd ever consider commercial aviation as a career. "We could use pilots like you," he said. "Pilots who stay calm when everything falls apart." First Officer Chen requested transfer to the military training program. If they could produce pilots like Raptor 93, he wanted to learn from them. He was accepted into an instructor role, where he told every new pilot in training about the day a teenage girl showed him what real skill looked like. Robert Chen, the investment banker from 7B, started a foundation supporting young people in aviation. The Raptor 93 Foundation provided scholarships, mentorship, and flight training to kids who dreamed of flying but couldn't afford it. He personally interviewed every applicant, looking for the same qualities he'd missed in Ellie: courage, determination, quiet competence. "I learned something that day," he told people who asked why he'd started the foundation. "I learned that I've been judging people my entire life based on what they looked like instead of who they were. I yelled at a child and she saved my life. I can't undo that. But I can honor her by helping other kids like her. Kids who get dismissed because they're young or small or quiet. Kids who are extraordinary but nobody notices because they're not looking past the surface." The foundation thrived, funded by Robert's own money and donations from Flight 703 passengers who wanted to give back. And on a crisp autumn day, in a ceremony attended by military officials, government representatives, and survivors from Flight 703, Ellie Ward received the Civil Honor Medal for extraordinary heroism in aviation. She wore her dress uniform, formal military attire that made her look older but still couldn't hide how young she really was. The uniform fit perfectly, tailored specifically for her small frame. Medals and ribbons decorated the chest, each one representing accomplishments that most pilots twice her age would envy. She stood straight, shoulders back, chin up. Still small. Still young-looking. But carrying herself with quiet dignity that commanded respect. The Vice President of the United States made the presentation personally. He stood at the podium, looking out at the assembled crowd, and spoke. "It is rare that we witness true heroism. Rarer still when that heroism comes from someone so young. But I've learned in my years of public service that courage doesn't respect age. Excellence doesn't require years of experience. Leadership doesn't wait for gray hair. These qualities only require character. And Ellie Ward, Raptor 93, has shown us what real character looks like. When systems failed, when adults were overwhelmed, when 264 people faced certain death, a 17-year-old girl walked calmly through chaos and saved them all. She didn't hesitate. She didn't doubt. She saw what needed to be done and did it with skill that defies explanation. Some people question whether teenagers should be trained as pilots. Whether we're putting young people in dangerous situations. Whether programs like EYAP are ethical. I understand those concerns. But I also understand this: when Flight 703 was falling from the sky, those ethical questions didn't matter. What mattered was that someone had the courage and skill to act. And that someone was a teenage girl who'd been trained to be extraordinary. So today, we honor not just Ellie Ward, but what she represents. The idea that greatness can come from unexpected places. That heroes don't always look like our Hollywood movies tell us they should. That sometimes, the smallest person in the room is the bravest. That sometimes, the quietest voice speaks the truest words. That sometimes, the hero everyone overlooks is the one who saves them all. He placed the medal around her neck. The weight settled on her shoulders, not just medal and ribbon, but the physical representation of what she'd accomplished. Of the lives she'd saved. Of the example she'd set. Ellie stood at attention and saluted. The Vice President returned the salute, then surprised everyone by extending his hand. Thank you for your service, Raptor 93. Thank you for showing us what's possible. They shook hands, her small hand disappeared in his, and cameras captured the moment from every angle. After the ceremony, Ellie stood outside the building, the medal heavy around her neck. Media wanted photos. Officials wanted conversations. Other pilots wanted to meet her, shake her hand, tell her they'd been inspired. She declined politely. This wasn't about fame. It had never been about recognition. She'd helped because people needed help. She'd acted because that's what her training had prepared her to do. A small voice cut through the noise. Miss Ellie. She turned. A girl stood there, maybe 9 years old, with wide brown eyes and braided hair decorated with colorful beads. She clutched her mother's hand nervously, clearly wanting to approach but afraid. Can I ask you something? The girl said, her voice barely above a whisper. Ellie knelt down to her level, bringing her face even with the child's. Of course. What's your name? Maya. Hi Maya. What did you want to ask? I want to be a pilot. I want to fly planes and help people like you did. Maya's eyes filled with tears. But everyone at school says I'm too small. Too young. They say girls can't be fighter pilots, that we're not strong enough. They laugh at me when I talk about flying. Her voice broke. Is that true? Am I too small to be a pilot? Ellie took both of Maya's hands in hers. Looked her straight in the eyes. Can I tell you a secret? Maya nodded, leaning closer. 6 months ago, I was sitting on an airplane in seat 7A. A man sitting next to me yelled at me in front of everyone. He said I was a troublemaker. He said children shouldn't be flying alone. He made me feel small and unimportant. Everyone around us looked at me with pity or judgment. Nobody thought I was anyone special. Maya's eyes went wide. And then, just a little while later, that airplane had an emergency. Everything went wrong. Everyone thought they were going to die. And I walked to the cockpit and landed that airplane and saved all 264 people aboard. Including the man who had yelled at me. Really? Really? You know what I learned that day, Maya? Excellence doesn't care what you look like. It doesn't care about your age or your size or what other people think. It only cares about your skill, your dedication, and your courage. If you want to fly, then you fly. Don't let anyone tell you you're too small or too young or not strong enough. Those are just words from people who don't understand what you're capable of. But how do I make people believe in me? Ellie smiled. You don't need them to believe in you first. You believe in yourself. You work hard. You study everything you can learn. You practice until it becomes part of you. And when the moment comes, when you have the chance to prove yourself, you do it so well that they have no choice but to see the truth. Can you do that? Maya stood straighter, her shoulders going back, her chin lifting. Yes. Yes, I can. Then you're already on your way. Ellie stood and gave her a formal military salute. Good luck, pilot. The sky's waiting for you. And it doesn't care how small you are, it only cares how brave you are. Maya returned the salute with a grin that could have lit up the entire airport. Her mother mouthed, "Thank you," with tears in her eyes. As Ellie walked away, surrounded by handlers and security, she thought about that moment on Flight 703. The fear she'd felt but hadn't shown. The weight of 264 lives depending on her skill. The seconds where one wrong input would have killed everyone. The incredible pressure of being 17 years old and responsible for saving people 3 times her age. But mostly she thought about Maya's smile. About the hope that had replaced fear in that little girl's eyes. About the way a simple conversation could change someone's entire trajectory. Because that was the real victory. Not the medal heavy around her neck. Not the headlines or the congressional hearings or the classified briefings where generals defended the program. The victory was showing the world, showing little girls like Maya, that heroes come in unexpected forms. That courage has no age requirement. That excellence can't be limited by appearance or size or what society tells you is possible. That night, Ellie returned to base. Back to training. Back to simulators and briefings and classified exercises. Back to being just another pilot in a program that was no longer quite so secret. But she carried something new. Not just the medal, that was packed away carefully in a box. She carried the knowledge that she'd made a difference. That 264 people were alive because of her. That somewhere, little girls like Maya were dreaming bigger because they'd heard her story. She also carried the burden of what came next. The program would change now. More oversight. More scrutiny. More questions about ethics and safety and whether training teenage pilots was wise or exploitative. But she also knew the truth, they'd seen what was possible. They'd seen that age didn't determine ability. That size didn't limit courage. That excellence could emerge from the most unexpected places. In her quarters that night, Ellie opened her worn notebook, the same one she'd been clutching on Flight 703. She turned to a blank page and wrote. Today I learned that the smallest person can make the biggest difference. That being underestimated is actually a gift, it means people don't see you coming. That courage isn't the absence of fear, it's acting despite fear. That respect has to be earned, but it should never be withheld based on appearance alone. I hope I never forget the weight of those 264 lives. The trust First Officer Chin showed me. The salute from Staff Sergeant Hayes. The apology from Mr. Chin. The gratitude in Maya's eyes. I am Raptor 93. That call sign was earned through skill, but today it became something more. Today it became a symbol. A reminder that heroes don't always look the way we expect. And I promise to honor that. Every time I fly. Every time I train. Every time a little kid looks at me and wonders if they can be extraordinary too. The answer is yes. Always yes. Because excellence doesn't care what you look like. It only cares what you can do. She closed the notebook and turned off the light. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. More training. More scrutiny. More pressure to prove that the program worked, that she wasn't a fluke, that exceptional young people could handle the responsibility they'd been given. But tonight, she allowed herself to feel proud. Not of the medal or the media attention, but of the moment in the cockpit when everything had depended on her and she hadn't failed. When 264 people had needed her to be extraordinary and she had been. She was ready for whatever came next. Because she'd learned the most important lesson of all, never underestimate the power of someone who's been underestimated their entire life. They've got nothing to prove to you. They've already proven it to themselves. And in the end, that's the only opinion that truly matters.